Well, 2025 marks the 50th anniversary of the West Indies winning the first Men's World Cup back in 1975, where they defeated Australia by 17 runs in a high-scoring final, with Clive Lloyd scoring a century and Viv Richards with 5 memorable run-outs. Well, back in 2002, I spoke with the Australian captain of that campaign, Ian Chappell, about that first World Cup. I hope you enjoy it.
I actually conned the Australian Cricket Board into sending us to Canada as a lead up to the tour, because I had a few mates in Toronto who were desperate to get the Australian cricket team. I'd been there in '73 to do some coaching, and they'd met Terry Jenner and Greg. They were coming through. They didn't hang around too long, but they came through, I think, and spent a little bit of time in Toronto. Anyhow, I had a great time there for 3 weeks coaching, and they said, "Oh, can you get the Australian cricket team back there?" So I actually spoke to the board when the World Cup was coming up, and I said to the board, "Look, there's no way we can just go to England without playing any cricket in the lead up. We've got to play a bit of cricket." "Well, where would you suggest we play this cricket?" And I said, "Well, why don't we go to Canada?" And they sort of looked. I said, "No, we'll get some really good cricket." Anyhow, we organised this trip to, we did Vancouver and Toronto, and we had a terrific time there. And I told the guys, "Look, we're being billeted." I said, "I don't know Vancouver, but if it's not so good in Vancouver, just trust me, Toronto will make up for it." Anyhow, all the guys came up to me and said it was fantastic. And Toronto, everyone had a great time. So into the bargain, we got beaten by Western Ontario at the Toronto Cricket Skating and Curling Club. But as I explained to everybody, we didn't have much of an attack the day we got beaten. We only had Lilly, Thompson, Walker and Mallet in our attack. So we arrived in England. We weren't all that popular, actually, because we played some practice games amongst ourselves. And my explanation for this, because the counties had organised a couple of practice games, and obviously they were seeing it as a bit of a money-making venture for them to have the Australians playing a practice match. All the other countries did that. But as I explained to Fred Bennett was our manager on that tour, and Fred wasn't too happy about the fact, he said, "It's all organised, mate." And I said, "Well, I don't give a continental about that." I said, "We got 16 players because we took 16 because we had test matches to play after the tour. Everybody else only had their squad of 14. I said, "I've got 16 players to keep in form, not 14. And I said, "So we're going to play 8 aside, and we'll get some of the journos to field, and we'll have." I think we had 2 practice matches amongst ourselves. So anyhow, we weren't too popular with the counties that we cancelled these games, and anyhow we had these practice matches, which worked out pretty well, except that Walters tended to make a bit of a mess of the second one. The sides I picked, I think what I did basically was put a strong attack one side and a strong batting line up the other side to try and so it'd be a reasonably competitive match, but so that the good batsmen, basically got to face some pretty decent bowling. So I think I was in the batting lineup. I hope I put myself in the batting lineup. And we had Thompson. Oh no, sorry. No, I must have been in the bowling lineup. That's right. We had Thompson and Hurst, and I can't remember Mallet, and I'm not sure. We must have had Walker as well. And the opposition had Lilly, and then Dougie opened the bowling at the other end. Greg would have been in that side because he was captain of the side as well. So anyhow, we had that's right. We only had one opener. That's right. They had McCosker and Turner opening for them, and then they would have had Greg, and I can't remember who else they had in their lineup. Richie Robinson, the keeper, would have been in their lineup. So anyhow, we had Bruce Laird, who was basically the third opener, and he wasn't in the squad for the World Cup because we had to leave 2 guys out. We left Jim Higgs, and we left Bruce Laird out, I think. So we had Lairdy opening the batting and Rodney opening with him. And then I was at 3. Anyhow, they survived the first over against Lilly. First over from Walters, he knocks Laird over. I can't remember how he gets him. Caught behind, I think. So I go in and he knocks me over quick. And when I get back in the dressing room, I can't remember who was going out to bat, but I don't think it was one of our front-line batsmen. And I said, "This is bloody ridiculous." Stumpy, being Bruce Laird, put the pads back on and, you go in at the fall of the next wicket. Anyhow, Walters knocks somebody else over, or somebody else gets out. Then Bruce Laird goes back in, and Doug immediately knocks him over for not very many again. So I go back in again. And I'm on a hat-trick. That's right, Doug must have got the previous wicket, he gets Laird, and I go in on a hat-trick, you see, and I thought, strike me pink. If Walters gets me on a hat-trick, I will never, ever hear the end of this. I thought, what do I do? And I thought, at least if he gets me, I'm not going to just be playing a forward defensive shot. So I slogged him down the ground. And actually, as I took block, the little clever dick is back at the top of his mark, and he says, haven't I seen you before in this innings? You know. So anyhow, Walters had, I think he got 5 for 12 or something like that in the game. Made a total mess of the of all this supposed batting practice. So this was the sort of frame of mind. We were, I'd have to say we were pretty relaxed, but I mean, we were very confident of our own ability at that stage. And I think we felt that the first game was pretty important, the one against Pakistan. I think if we felt if we won that, we'd be guaranteed a spot in the semi-finals. We then played Sri Lanka. So I think we felt that we'd be guaranteed a spot in the semi-finals, which is the way it worked out. The other thing that was pretty good about the World Cup was we had a few days at the start of the tour. There was obviously an official function and so on, where we all the teams stayed in the one hotel. Now, I'm not sure whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. I'd say it was a good thing because we all got to know each other a bit better. The reason I sort of felt it mightn't be such a good idea is because Don Pringle, was father of Derek Pringle, and sadly was killed in a car accident not all that long after the World Cup. But he was playing for East Africa at the time, and Don Pringle and Dougie Walters discovered that they had quite a bit in common. Main thing that they had in common was that they both liked beer a lot and they both liked staying up very late. So these two could be found in the bar chatting away together. They struck up a pretty decent friendship. So it was a good feeling in those early few days, and then we all dispersed to go and play, the first game in different centres. But it was a good feeling. I think that's where I had one of the early approaches about playing professional cricket. Came while we were all at that Kensington Close Hotel. We had I think I had about 3 approaches to play professional cricket, and that was one of them. So this was, the feeling was pretty relaxed. I don't remember much of the chat about one-day cricket, whether we thought it would be a success or not. I don't really recall that we had any great thoughts about that. I think everybody was just, this is an interesting tournament and let's just get on and play it. So that was really the feeling. We played against Sri Lanka. East Africa were in the other group, and we'd beaten Pakistan in a good tight game. We then scored 334 I think against Sri Lanka. We had a big opening partnership. I think McCosker got Alan Turner got 100 and Rick got a big score as well. I think we put on about 174 for the first wicket. Anyhow, we made 334, and I remember speaking to the guys before we went out there, and we had some fairly ordinary publicity in the lead up because they'd sort of talked about the 74-5 series, and a lot of the publicity surrounded Thommo and the fact that he hit a few of the England batsmen, and there was always this talk about all we did to beat England was bounce the hell out of them and abuse them, which wasn't the way we beat them. But anyhow, it suited the English press to see it that way. So a lot of the reports were very anti-Australia to a degree, but Thommo in particular. Lily they'd seen before in 72, and they weren't so anti-Lily, but they were very anti-Thommo. So I said to the guys, we've got 334 on the board. I said, we don't need to go out there and bowl a lot of short stuff. We can do a bit of good for our PR image here. We'll keep them pitched up, and we'll have a nice game, and we'll win it, and we'll be into the semi-final. So we pitched them up for a while, and the Sri Lankan batsmen just kept belting them. And anyhow, I remember when I brought Thommo back for his second spell, I said to him, listen, we've seen that these so-and-sos can play off the front foot. Now let's see if they can play off the back foot. And with that, Thommo actually hit the opening batter, who was about 50 not out. He hit him on the toe with one of his Sanchu crushes. And this guy, you can imagine, 50 not out against the great Australian attack of Lilly and Thompson as an opening batsman. He was happy as Larry with that. He was off. But unfortunately for him, the captain was down the other end, and the captain was a pretty tough cookie, and he said, hey, you just get back and bat. So you wouldn't want to know. Next ball, Thommo, bang, same toe, exactly the same toe. You see. So this guy, he's really had enough now. He's see you later. The captain says, get back and bat. So you wouldn't want to know. Thommo does it again, whack on the same toe. By this stage, he's really had enough, and the captain agrees with him. So he started to hobble off, and a couple of his teammates came running onto the field and started to help him, one under each arm. Next thing we know, a bloody stretcher arrives, and they carry him off on a stretcher. And I'm thinking, oh, this is not doing our PR image so much good. Next guy came in, and Thommo hit him, I think, in the thigh pad. I think he hobbled off. I can't remember what happened to him. Anyhow, the next guy that came in was a fellow called Duleep Mendes, who went on to be a pretty decent player for Sri Lanka. And managed their World Cup winning side in '96. Anyhow, Duleep was only about 5'2", which is not the ideal height when you're facing Thommo. But then again, I haven't really discovered what the ideal height is for facing Thommo. And Thommo bowled one of those deliveries that only he could bowl. It pitched just short of a length. It wasn't a bouncer at all, just short of a length. It took off, and to make it even worse, it cut back at Duleep a little bit off the pitch and hit him straight between the eyes, right between the eyes. Made this horrible crack, and Duleep went down, poleaxed, lying there in the dirt around the crease. I ran up from first slip, got to him, and the first thing, before I even said, "Are you all right, mate?" I sort of looked down and I saw his eyes were open, and I thought, thank heavens he's not dead. Anyhow, then I said, "Are you all right, mate?" And as I said that, a little tear started to roll down his cheek, you see, and he just looked up at me. And he said, "I going now." I mean, I've heard of batsmen being in two minds, but Duleep was definitely of one mind. He was out of there. So you can imagine headlines the next day. Two in hospital, one carried off on a stretcher. Thompson strikes again. So much for our PR exercise. We did win the game. But I think if you look up the scorecard, I think Sri Lanka, in reply to our 334, I think they were something like 4 for 276 they were 60 over games in those days. I might have even got a couple of the 4 wickets. So we didn't, we weren't exactly mowing them down. They were they were a very good batting side. They were a bit light on for bowling in those days. They had a lot of spinners, but they could certainly bat. And I guess it's interesting, when I hear people decrying the idea of globalising the game and adding to the number of teams that come into the World Cup, I think back always to that first game against Sri Lanka. I mean, that was 1975, 21 years on, they won the World Cup. So you just... I think you've got to globalise.
Well, the group stage saw Australia beat Pakistan and Sri Lanka, unfortunately losing to the West Indies in their final group game. They played England in the semi-final, where Gary Gilmore rocked them with 6 for 14, as they were bundled out for 93. Australia at one stage were 6 for 39, but hung on for a 4-wicket win. In the other semi, the West Indies beat New Zealand by 5 wickets. Thus, an Australia-West Indies showdown loomed for the final.
I remember it was the longest day I've ever had at the cricket ground. We got there early. We arrived on a bus. There was a lot of West Indies supporters around when we pulled up in the bus. And they weren't... The thing that struck me immediately was they weren't being cocky. There was none of this, we're going to beat you, or, we're going to whoop your ass, or any of that sort of stuff. It was all, good luck, man. This will be a great game. I think they were as happy as Larry. The two finalists were the West Indies and Australia. Because there's always been this great respect between the two countries, not only between the players but the supporters. And I'll talk more about this after the game. But that's my abiding memory of arriving at the ground, is these West Indian supporters wishing us all the best and hope it's a good game. Obviously, they were hoping that the West Indies would win, and I think they probably said that to us. But it wasn't in a cocky way. So when I won the toss, I sent them in. We must have started early, because I think I felt that with the early start there might be, if there was going to be anything in the track, that's when it would be. And obviously we had an all-pace attack, so having left Mallard out of the side, so it suited us to bowl first. And we did all right early. We got Fredo got out in the first over. I think he actually hooked Dennis for 6, but trod on his wicket in doing it, so he was out early. I think we got Greenwich pretty early. It was about 3 for 51, I think, when Lloydie came in. So Rowan Canai, they'd picked Rowan in the side, obviously because he'd had a lot of experience playing one-day cricket with Warwickshire. He batted at 3, and he doesn't get much credit, but he played a very, very important role in that innings. I think we had him 3 for 51, and Thommo had probably Rowan caught behind off a no ball at that point in the game. And so that turned out to be quite a turning point. Because Rowan played, whilst it was a significant role, he played very much second fiddle to Lloydie. Lloydie had this habit of playing big hands at Lords in finals. He did it a couple of times for Lancashire, and he obviously did it in this game for the West Indies. Played very, very well. I remember many, many years later, Ross Edwards and I used to work together at Channel 9, and quite often we'd run into each other in the car park, and if anyone was around, it was a standing joke. I'd say to him, "Oh, is this the guy that dropped Clive Lloyd in the World Cup final?" And Roscoe, because he's such a temperament, would laugh about it. And then after this had been sort of going on and been a standing joke for about a year or so, he came to me one day and he said, "You keep making this joke about me dropping Lloydie in the World Cup final." He said, "But what you don't obviously remember is that I actually dropped him twice in the World Cup final." I said, "Crikey, I don't remember that, Roscoe. Better you don't remind me." I'm not sure that Roscoe did, but anyhow, that was and Roscoe was always a pretty hard taskmaster. Maybe it was a very, very difficult chance. But Lloydie played particularly well. They got a big score, 290 odd. But Lords was so fast that day. I mean, we'd had a very dry spell. In fact, that's the other thing I should have remembered. The day we landed from Canada, the day we landed in England, it snowed. I think it was June 1 or June 2. It snowed, and we're thinking, "Oh, this is going to be nice." And then the weather just turned, and it was fantastic from that day on. And the World Cup final was a very hot day. The ground was dry, and when the grounds get a bit dry in England, they're so fast. I remember fielding in the very late overs. I went to a sort of a deep slip, and I was about halfway to the boundary because Thommo was bowling quick, and the pitch was reasonably quick, but it was very true. Anyhow, a couple of edges had flown and they'd gone way over my head in the slip. So I thought, well, I might as well, I'm not going to catch them at first slip. So I went back, and it was either Keith Boyce or Bernard Julian nicked one off Thommo, and it was coming, and at first I thought I had a chance of catching it. And I started to come forward, and then I realised it was going to bounce in front of me. And then, I guess being an old baseballer, I then tried to block it with my body, and I got a lucky break. It hit and just deviated a little bit, and I felt the wind of it go past my arm, and it went for 4. And I thought to myself, if that had hit me in the arm, it would have just smashed my forearm, because, as I say, the ground was just, it was like bouncing on the pitch. And it just took off. So when they got 290, whatever it was, 291, 292, I certainly felt that we could get him. And I think that most guys in our team felt that we had a chance of getting him if we batted well. Alan Turner was the first of the run-outs. I called him. He hesitated a little bit. And I remember looking back over my shoulder because he'd hesitated. And I remember when I looked at it, admittedly from the other end, but as a player, you always seem to have a bit of a sense of run-outs. And I remember thinking at the time, I felt that he made it. Anyhow, he was given out. I've seen photos since, and the evidence of the photos suggests that I was probably right, that he probably had made it. But anyhow, he was given out, and that's all that mattered. Then I ran Greg out. I remember I cut it down the hill towards the scoreboard at Lords, and it slopes away. It's quite a predominant slope down the hill there. As I say, the ground was so quick, and I cut it. They had a backward point and a cover point, and Viv was at cover point. So I hit it to his left hand. I hit it straight down the lines, because you can see at Lords, because there's a whole lot of pitches that they'd used before. And I knew that I cut it dead square because it went down the batting creases all the way down. So Viv had to go to his left, and it was, I thought it could easily go for 4 when I hit it. But I had no hesitation in calling Greg for yes. And Greg was a great one for sending me back. He always said that it's the bad runners who get run out, not the good runners. And he said, that's why you always get run out when we're running between wickets together. So if he'd have had any doubt, I'm sure he would have sent me back. But he responded. And Viv somehow or other managed to knock the thing down on his left-hand side, picked it up, whirled around and threw the stumps down from dead side on. So that was the second run out. I was the third one, I think. I got run out going back for a third. Once again, Viv throwing to Lloydie, who Lloydie was bowling at that stage. And I still felt we could win the game all the way up to Gary Gilmore got an absolute long hop from Keith Boyce, I think. Boyce tried to bounce him, and it just sort of sat there about waist height. And Gus made no attempt to hit it to into the ground. He was looking for the 6 at that stage, which we probably needed just to boost the run rate a little bit. And he just slightly mishit it, and I think Kanai caught him running around the boundary in front of the stand there. I forget what it's called, the Father Time stand or whatever it is. So at that point I thought, the game's gone now. And then we had Lilly and Thompson came together. I think Max Walker, he might have been the 4th run out after Gus Gilmore got out. But all these blokes could bat. At that stage, Max Walker he made a lot of runs in the 74-5 series against England. Dennis had, Thommo was always quite useful. Anyhow, I'd gone in to pack. I'd left the balcony and gone in to pack my bags thinking this is all over. And I think a couple of the other guys had done the same thing. Next thing, we start to hear shouts and screams from the balcony, Sir Donald Lilly, and shouts like that, you see. And what the hell's going on out there? So I go out. What's happening? And the guy said, we've got to show winning this. The guys are playing well. So I sit there and start to watch again, you see. And then Lilly, I think it is, Dennis skies the ball towards mid-wicket, and it's obviously going to be caught. I think Fredericks was the fieldsman underneath it. And the crowd started running onto the ground, and apparently out in the middle, Dennis wanted to run. Now it'd be a good contest. Who you thought would have been the least conservative, Dennis or Thommo? You wouldn't put either of them in the conservative category. But it turns out on this occasion that Thommo was the conservative one, because this huge crowd, a lot of the crowd have run onto the field, and the fieldsman, whoever's caught it, I think it was Roy Fredericks, he's engulfed by spectators, you see. And Dennis starts to run. He realises it's a no ball. He runs down the other end, yelling at Thommo, come on, run, run, run. We can get a few runs while the crowd's on the ground. And, I think at that stage we needed 21 to win or something like that. And Thommo says, no, go back, you bloody idiot. One of these guys could have the ball in his pocket, sneak in, behind the crowd and run us out. So it turns out that Thommo was the conservative one. Anyhow, I think they got it down to 17 to win, and then Thommo got run out. I think trying to run a bye or something, and I think Derek Murray threw the stumps down as a keeper. So great, was a great attempt, but we lost the game. So it's like any other loss. You don't feel that good about it, but as I always used to tell Rodney Marsh, when you win, you have a few drinks to celebrate. And I said, when you lose, you have a few drinks to drown your sorrows. And I said, after about 6, you're not sure whether you're celebrating or you're drowning your sorrows. And that sort of appealed to Rodney. So anyhow, we all had a drink in the dressing room, and then I said to our guys, right, come on, we're the losing side, we've got to go down and congratulate the West Indies. So we all marched down there into the dressing rooms with our beer, and by that stage, most of our guys, and certainly the West Indies guys, had all changed. Apart from Rodney and myself. Rodney and I were still in our creams. I guess it's probably 8 o'clock or something like that by the time we get down to the dressing rooms, because you have the presentation ceremony. I don't know, probably around about 8 o'clock. By now there's only Rodney, myself and Lloydie left. Lloydie's dressed, Rodney and myself are still in our creams. So somebody comes into the dressing room and says, righto, come on, out, and they start flicking the lights on and off. Come on, everybody out, we've got to clean up and all this sort of business, you see. And I'm staggered. We must have got extra beer from somewhere, because it was traditional in the English dressing rooms that before play you had to order your drink that they were going to serve you. So you got one drink. So everybody always used to, the drinkers would ask the non-drinkers to order a pint, so that you'd get an extra drink or two. But you'd always go for the biggest, and so you'd have this. And the worst part was they'd bring them in at afternoon tea time in a normal game, and I think we probably even had tea time in the one-day final. So your bloody pint would be sitting there from afternoon tea till stumps. It'd be as flat as a tack and warm by the time you got to it. Anyhow, somehow we've got hold of some extra drinks. We get kicked out. I got no idea what time we get kicked out of the dressing room. So we sort of looked at each other, well, what are we going to do now? Well, the tavern's still open, let's go down the tavern, which is just by the Grace Gates there at Lord's. So we wander down to the end of the tavern, and there's a huge, you can imagine, the tavern's full to overflowing. And, that's right, sorry, Mike Proctor's with us. Mike Proctor was in the West Indies dressing room. Procky'd just been there to watch the game. So Procky's in his civvies. So there's 4 of us. We march into this, and there's a huge crowd of people in there. A lot of them, once again, West Indies supporters. And this is where I remember again, and this is why I've always had a great deal of respect for West Indies supporters. They were coming up to us saying, great game, man, great game. And there was no cockiness about it. They just said, you guys put up a great fight. That was a fantastic game of cricket. Well done. You know, let's buy you a beer. And there was all this, it was this sort of atmosphere. And it was a great atmosphere in the tavern. All these guys coming up and belting on the back. Suddenly, this big guy, black guy, really big guy, he walks up and he looks at the group and he says, who's that guy there? And he points to Mike Proctor, you see. And I'm thinking, oh, crikey, you know, apartheid, South Africa. We don't, you know, it's been such a good day and it's been such a good atmosphere. We don't want a problem here. And I'm thinking, you know, do I try and flum it? I thought, oh, you always tell the truth. I said, mate, it's Mike Proctor, one of the world's best all-rounders. Mike Proctor, man, it's great to meet you, you know. And then he, you know, he just wanted to sort of shake Lloydie by the hand, shake Rodney and I by the hand, and I'm thinking, you know, there's going to be trouble here. But so it was just a fantastic atmosphere in the tavern. And Rodney and I left the tavern when they closed the tavern, and it was well after midnight. So we'd managed to be in our creams. We worked out, I think, that we'd been at least 14 hours in our creams. Everybody talks about it being the longest day of the year, which it was, but it was also the longest cricketing day that Rodney and I have ever had. As I said earlier, I think the main thing that I can think about after the tournament was that once we'd sort of settled down and you got over the loss and you thought to yourself, well, the World Cup is here to stay. That was one thing. The second thing was, at that stage, that you had to play the tournament in England because you had a lot of West Indies supporters. I remember the game we played the West Indies at the Oval, not the final, this was in the round robin section. We played the West Indies at the Oval. There was a crowd of 18,000, which was the capacity for the Oval in those days. And they used to designate before the game who was the home captain. And somehow or other, Australia, we were the home team for that game. And I went out to toss with Lloydie. And I looked at Lloydie and I looked around the ground. I said, mate, how am I the home captain here? I said, have a look at the crowd. There was 17,999 West Indians there, and there might have been one Australian or one white person in the crowd. I said to Lloydie, I shouldn't be tossing the coin here. And you had, obviously, India and Pakistan. When we played Pakistan at Headingley, huge Pakistan population around in the Bradford, Leeds area. So there was a very good crowd for that game. So you got some terrific crowds. Obviously, India got a big crowd wherever they played. And also there was quite a decent-sized Sri Lankan population in those days in England. So, and Australia and the West Indies, or Australia didn't have so much in the way of spectators, but we were obviously a very good drawing side. So you could play a lot of games and get pretty decent crowds there, which in those days you couldn't do in Australia. So my feeling was that, sure, the World Cup is a success and it will continue to be a success, but at this stage you've got to play it in England. Then I think once Kerry Packer came along, World Series cricket, people in Australia started to see the other teams on a much more regular basis. Then I think I felt at some stage or other, I can't remember what time, Australia's ready for a World Cup now because these other games, not including the Australian team, will draw quite well, enough to make a World Cup worthwhile in this country. And I think that's the great thing now about the World Cup, and in part that's due to Kerry Packer and what he did with the game. That you can play the World Cup anywhere now, and the crowds will be worthwhile.